vows to destroy Hamas after massacres. The main stories. What happened? Israel pounded Gaza with airstrikes this week and mobilized 360,000 military reservists in preparation for a major offensive after Hamas militants killed more than 200 Israelis in a brutal string of surprise attacks, marking the bloodiest single day in Israel's history, in a coordinated assault that caught Israel's vaunted military and intelligence services off guard. Hundreds of Palestinian gunmen broke through border barricades and poured across the Gaza-Israel border, traveling in pickup trucks and on motorcycles, boats, and paragliders. They rampaged through communities, burning homes and slaughtering civilians. They attacked revelers at an all-night rave, killing at least 260 people and taking others hostage. In all, an estimated 150 hostages were taken to Hamas-controlled Gaza. There were reports of rapes, beheadings, and children killed in front of their parents. Videos circulated of Hamas fighters parading victims, alive and dead, through cheering crowds. The death count continued to grow as rescuers went from house to house recovering bodies. It's a massacre, said Israeli Commander Maj. General Ataverov. It's something I never saw in my life. Something more like a pogrom from our grandparents' time. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war on Hamas. Every Hamas member is a dead man, said Netanyahu. We will crush and destroy it. Israel cut off electricity and deliveries of food and fuel to Gaza, a narrow strip of land home to more than 2 million Palestinians, as airstrikes demolished neighborhoods. Health officials in the territory reported more than 1,100 deaths, and humanitarian groups pleaded for safe corridors for aid delivery. There is no safe place in Gaza right now, said journalist Hassan Jabbar. President Biden called the attack pure, unadulterated evil, vowing to stand with Israel and supply what it needs to take care of itself. He confirmed that at least 14 Americans were killed in the Hamas attack, and that others are among the hostages. U.S. intelligence agencies were investigating reports that Iran had helped plan the terrorist assault. See controversy. Page 6. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who traveled to Israel in a show of support, said the U.S. had not yet seen evidence of Iran's direct involvement, but he noted that Iran's support of Hamas over many years is clear. What the editorial said, the images are hard to shake, said the Washington Examiner. Terrorized children, civilian women stripped and abused, a Holocaust survivor in a wheelchair hauled off as a hostage. The horrifying spectacle is testament to the enduring truth that Hamas is driven by a fetishistic desire to subjugate and slaughter Jews simply because they are Jews. For Israel to crush them as a moral and existential necessity, the barbarism of Hamas must be remembered. When moral relativists start criticizing Israel's response as disproportionate, Hamas' murderous assault demands only one response from the world, said Bloomberg Outrage. An unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself. Biden's pledge to stand with Israel full stop is a good start, but even as Israel does what it must to protect its citizens, all parties must strive to avoid a broader conflict. As elusive as it looks right now, peace in the region must remain the ultimate goal. The only alternative is more bloodshed, death, and terror. What the columnist said, this was Israel's 9/11, said David Ignatius in the Washington Post, and not simply because of the innocent lives lost, but because of the massive intelligence failures that preceded the attack. Israelis knew the malevolent hatred that animated Hamas and its backers in Iran. What they didn't recognize was the creativity and competence of their adversaries. Hamas used drones to destroy Israeli cameras and remote-controlled machine guns along the Gaza border, and then smashed through border fences with bulldozers, like the planes that smashed into the Twin Towers. It's a level of organized malice that was, literally, unthinkable. Hamas must be destroyed, said John Podhoretz in commentary. After one of the bloodiest pogroms in human history, nothing else is acceptable. With more than 1,200 killed, there's no difference here from the ghastly tales of Nazis who tore through Poland rounding up Jews and mowing them down. To kill anyone who comes for the Jews in such a fashion is the secular purpose of a Jewish state. In a revolting turn, some pro-Palestinian Western leftists cheered the carnage, said Noah Smith in his Substack newsletter. At a rally promoted by the New York City chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, gleeful speakers joked about the murders as attendees whooped with delight. At Harvard, 30 campus groups issued a statement holding the Israeli regime entirely responsible. It's one thing to criticize Israel, but to excuse, or even celebrate the slaughter of civilians suggests a deep sickness in the Western leftist movement, just as the aftershocks of 9/11 rippled out across the world in dangerous and unpredictable ways. So, too, will the aftershocks of this assault, said Max Boot in the Washington Post. Israel will rightly strike back with overwhelming force and ultimately prevail, but then Then what? Few Israelis want a long-term occupation of Gaza that will lead to more bloodshed and misery, but they are running out of alternatives. Ultimately, both sides must recognize that they have no alternative but to live side by side in peace. But for now, war and suffering are the order of the day, with no clear end in sight. Illustration by Howard McWilliam. Cover photos from Getty 3. Israeli artillery opens fire near the border with Gaza. What next? What next? Netanyahu has agreed to form a unity government to lead the country via a wartime cabinet, said Dov Lieber in the Wall Street Journal. It will bring together opposition leaders, including former Defense Minister Benny Gantz, in a broad coalition, a détente, that follows a long and bitter battle over Netanyahu's plans to overhaul the Israeli judiciary. The new government will be tested by a conflict that has the potential to turn into a wider war, said Naval Tusi in Politico. Fighting could spread to the West Bank, where tensions have risen as Israel has built more settlements on land claimed by Palestinians and other militant groups, such as the Lebanon-based Hezbollah and Iran-backed group that traded fire with Israeli forces this week, could seize the moment to spur violence. The U.S. has deployed an aircraft carrier and ships to the eastern Mediterranean. This is not a moment for any party hostile to Israel to exploit these attacks, said President Biden. The world is watching.
Americans among the hostages in Gaza, and how they were covered. What happened? Israeli and U.S. officials face limited options this week for saving the lives of as many as 150 people, including an unknown number of U.S. citizens, taken hostage by Hamas and hidden in Gaza. Amid the militants' threats they would be killed, Hamas offered to exchange the hostages for about 4,500 Palestinians held prisoner in Israel, but threatened to broadcast the execution of one hostage for every Israeli airstrike on Gazan buildings, not preceded by a specific warning for civilians to flee. A few of its hostages, Hamas said, had already died. At least 20 American citizens remain missing after the terrorist attacks on Israeli border towns. President Biden vowed to work with Israel on every aspect of the hostage crisis, adding, "I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans." After breaching barriers at Israel's border with Gaza, Palestinian militants seized hostages at the Tribe of Nova Music Festival and from nearby villages, where they kidnapped octogenarians and children as young as 9 months old. In Tel Aviv, the families of 4 hostages with U.S. citizenship held a press conference pleading for their loved ones' return, but Israeli officials showed no indication they will agree to any prisoner swap. And though U.S. Special Forces were consulting with Israeli military officials, Biden administration officials said a targeted rescue mission may not be feasible. Forensic psychologist Nancy Zars, an FBI consultant on violent extremism, said Hamas would rather kill the hostages than see them freed. The picture for negotiations is bleak, she said. What the columnist said, "We've long known that Hamas weaponizes innocents, including their own, for sport," said Haley Struck in National Review. Now, as Israel prepares a major ground invasion of Gaza, they're using innocents as human shields. Videos of their kidnappings of Israeli civilians show militants driving 25-year-old Noor Arganani away on a motorcycle as she pleads, "Don't kill me." Yoni Asher watched a social media video that showed Hamas terrorists cramming his wife, mother-in-law, and 3- and 5-year-old daughters into another vehicle. Hamas seemed to focus on taking women, children, and the elderly. There is no recent precedent for the scale of the hostage situation, said David Leonhardt and Lauren Jackson in the New York Times. Israel has a long history of prioritizing the lives of its citizens, staging a daring raid in Entebbe, Uganda, in 1976 and trading more than 1,000 Palestinians for Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011. But after Hamas inflicted the deadliest attack in Israel's history, analysts doubt a wholesale exchange will happen. Attempting to free them by force may not succeed, said The Economist. The hostages could be scattered across numerous locations, including an elaborate network of tunnels under Gaza. For now, the hostages are more valuable alive than dead to Hamas. But if Israel's ground incursion threatens to topple Hamas from power, the militant group may conclude it has nothing to lose.
Iran, was it involved in Hamas attack on Israel? Controversy of the week. What a difference a week makes, said Gail Beckerman in The Atlantic, speaking to an audience in Washington late last month. President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan declared that the Middle East is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. A truce was holding in Yemen, he explained. Pro-Iranian militias had stopped attacking U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, and progress was being made on a land landmark peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Then, just 8 days later, came Hamas' shocking, multi-front attack on Israel in the new maelstrom of bloodshed that could engulf the whole region, particularly if proof emerges of Iranian involvement in the murderous rampage. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he has not yet seen evidence that Iran directed or was behind this particular attack, but Tehran's fingerprints are becoming visible, said Somerset in the Wall Street Journal. Sources within Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, say Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard had been planning the assault with Hamas since August and gave the final go-ahead last week in Beirut. Iran's primary goal, they say, was to disrupt the U.S., brokered talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a deal that would isolate Iran, elevate its main regional rival, and further marginalize the Palestinians. We need to be careful about pointing fingers, said Josh Meyer in USA Today. Yes, Iran supports Hamas with training, weapons, technical assistance, and some $70 million a year. But unlike Hezbollah, the Sunni Hamas is proudly independent of its Shiite sponsors in Tehran. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has denied any involvement, but said he'd like to kiss the foreheads of the attacked masterminds. It's possible that a lack of coordination with Tehran might explain how the assault escaped prior detection by U.S. and Israeli intelligence. Besides, said Elliot Abrams in National Review, the planning for an attack of this scale had to have started long before the thaw in Saudi-Israeli relations. Hamas may have been trying to show the world that it's now the strong face of Palestinian resistance and impress Iran into giving even more support. Either way, Hamas carnage upends Biden's plans for the Middle East, said The Economist in an editorial, with Riyadh blaming the bloodshed on Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory. The Saudi-Israeli deal is effectively dead, as is Biden's preferred two-state solution to the Palestinian question. As for Biden's hope of less hostile relations with Iran, the mere possibility of Iranian involvement in the attack has sparked fury among Republicans in Washington. Some are accusing Biden, who recently released $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets in exchange for the freeing of 5 U.S. prisoners, of effectively funding the attack himself. Never mind that the money has not yet been dispersed. Biden may have been naive about Iran, said Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu deserves far more blame for this horror. Netanyahu's divisive rule, particularly his corrupt attempt to neuter judicial oversight of his government, has fractured Israeli society and its military in ways that left Israel exposed and vulnerable when its enemies, inevitably, decided to strike. It will take time to unpick the catastrophic intelligence failure that allowed the surprise attack, said Charlie Sykes in The Bulwark. But what is clear after the slaughter in Israel, just as it was after 9/11, is that raw evil is a global reality, and that evil must be fought to be defeated.
Cambridge, Mass. Assigning blame, outraged alumni excoriated Harvard University for its seeming reluctance to condemn Hamas after a coalition of 30 mainly Muslim and pro-Palestinian student groups said the Israeli regime is entirely responsible for all unfolding violence in Israel. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary and Harvard President Lawrence Summers said that he was sickened that the university was at best neutral on acts of terror against Israel. St. Ted Cruz, our Texas, a Harvard Law School graduate, asked, "What the hell is wrong with Harvard?" Critics saw the Harvard student group's statement as evidence of a broader anti-Israel bias at American colleges. 2 days after the Hamas attacks, Harvard's leadership issued a statement calling for an environment of dialogue and empathy. Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, followed with a stronger statement describing the terrorist atrocities perpetrated by Hamas as abhorrent, but not directly addressing the declaration from student groups. Tensions soared as competing rallies sprang up across the country. Thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters demonstrated outside Israeli consulates in Atlanta, Chicago, and San Francisco, drawing a huge police presence to subdue confrontations with pro-Israel protesters. In New York, a brief skirmish broke out between rival protests outside the United Nations headquarters. In Times Square, pro-Palestinian religious chanted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," a slogan associated with Hamas and often seen as calling for the destruction of Israel. Several lawmakers who are members of Democratic Socialists of America condemned the group for promoting the rally, including New York Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The bigotry and callousness expressed in Times Square on Sunday were unacceptable and harmful, she said. Cambridge rally. World at a glance. London. Anti-Semitic violence. In the wake of the horrific terrorist attack on Israeli civilians by Hamas militants, pro-Palestinian groups demonstrated in European cities this week, prompting governments in the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy to deploy security outside synagogues and in Jewish neighborhoods. In North London, the windows of a kosher restaurant were smashed, while demonstrators at a pro-Palestinian rally outside the Israeli embassy shot fireworks at a building. Concern is especially high in France, home to Western Europe's largest populations of both Jews and Muslims, and where more than a dozen anti-Semitic acts were reported this week. The fear is real, said French Rabbi Michel Serfati. Israel, grief and anger, and a search for answers. This is Israel's 9/11, the day that changes everything, said Avi Meir in the Jerusalem Post. The unspeakable horror that Hamas terrorists wreaked when they burst across the border from Gaza last week and slaughtered more than 1,000 Israeli civilians is almost too hellish, too ghastly to be real. Gunmen invaded homes in the little kibbutzim of the south, shooting mothers who were covering their children's bodies with their own, then shooting the babies. They overran a music festival for peace, an outdoor rave, spraying the young people there with machine gun fire and then hunting the terrified survivors, raping and slashing throats. They carted off hostages, including grandmothers who were paraded through the streets of Gaza like trophies. It's not a surprise that Hamas would commit acts of terrorism, said Moshe Eldon Mariv. The militants who control desperately poor, blockaded Gaza have a burning hatred of Israel and are sworn to its destruction. But it is a shock, a visceral one, that they would behave with such ferocity, posting videos of themselves gleefully killing children. This was an epic debacle, said Alon Pinkus in Hemaretz. How could we, with all our hardware along the Gaza border, all our spies and informers, not have detected Hamas plans? It is Israel's greatest military and intelligence failure since the Arabs attacked on Yom Kippur in 1973. And this is worse, because that was a war on soldiers, while this was a massacre of families. The failure of imagination by the Israel Defense Forces, who didn't see Hamas as capable of such a sophisticated air, land, and sea assault, is incomprehensible, and the long-time assumption that periodically taking out Hamas leadership, known as mowing the lawn, could contain the threat has been revealed as inexcusably naive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu deserves the blame Israelis are now heaping on him, said Attila Sagfavi and Yediot Ernith. Our deterrence failed because his hard-right government was primarily focused on dismantling Israeli society, indeed our very democracy, turning us into a squabbling, divided nation that looked vulnerable. His insistence on eviscerating judicial independence prompted tens of thousands of Israelis to protest weekly for months and even caused some Israeli reservists to shirk their duty. He refused to rein in the extremists in his cabinet even after one of them provoked Palestinian fury by saying a Palestinian village should be erased, and it took him 5 days to finally form a unity government with opposition leader Benny Gantz. It is not the time to point fingers, said Mayor Ben Shabbat in Israel Him, but to retaliate. The new war cabinet, Netanyahu, Gantz, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, with General Gadi Eisenkot and U.S.-born diplomat Ron Dermer as observers, will call the shots. Their aim must be to destroy everything connected to Hamas, including the terrorist homes, offices, banks, and hideouts. Gaza is densely populated, with half its residents children, and civilians should be warned to leave. But surgical strikes are impossible this time. The bombs will drop, and if innocents die, that is the very high price Hamas must pay. They didn't see us as human beings. Atlantic writer Yair Rosenberg interviewed Israeli journalist Amir Tibin, who spent hours trapped in a safe room in the Nahal Oz kibbutz with his wife, Miri, and his daughters, 3-year-old Gelia and 1-year-old Carmel. This is an excerpt from the interview. A few minutes after we got in and we heard this gunfire, the electricity stopped. We had no food. We did have some water,
and we're telling our daughters, you have to be quiet now. You have to be absolutely quiet. Not a word. You can't cry, can't talk. It's dangerous, and my girls were absolute heroes. They waited silently in the dark for 10 hours, and they did not cry. They understood. I called a colleague and friend, Amos Harrell, the veteran military affairs correspondent for Haaretz. I told him, Amos, there are terrorists outside my house, maybe even inside. And what Amos told me in reply was the scariest thing I heard. He said, yes, I know, but it's not only in your kibbutz, it's not only in Nablus, it's all over southern Israel. I also called my father. My father is a retired general. He's 62 years old. He lives in Tel Aviv. And my parents told me, we're coming. It's an hour and 20-minute drive. Now, this goes against all logic. But I told myself, okay, right now I'm asking my 2 young daughters to put complete faith in me and my wife, in their parents, to do what we're telling them to save their lives, which is to be very, very quiet and to understand that we cannot get out of the room. We cannot go get food. We cannot go to the bathroom. We cannot go out to play. And I'm asking them to put their faith in me completely. And I told myself, I have to do the same thing right now. I have to trust my father, who is a trustworthy man, that if he said he will come here and save us, he will do it. My parents started driving from Tel Aviv. They arrived in the town of Sderot, which is the largest town in the border area. When they get there, they see people walking barefoot on the road. These are survivors from a music festival nearby, where the Hamas people came early in the morning and massacred more than 200 people who came to a music festival. My parents put the survivors in their car and took them farther away from the border, and then they turned around and they continued driving toward our area. They stop in a nearby community that is close to the border, but not as close as we are, and my father convinces a soldier who is standing there and looking for a way to help to come with him to Nablus, to my kibbutz, in order to kill terrorists and save families. They drive toward the kibbutz, but along the way, they see a military force being ambushed by Hamas fighters. They get out of the car. My father is retired. He doesn't have military-grade weapons, but he has a pistol with him, and he and this other soldier join the soldiers who are fighting the Hamas cell. They help kill them, and now they're very close to my kibbutz. They're 5 minutes from the entrance to my kibbutz, but 2 of the soldiers are wounded, and again, my father has to turn around. My mom takes the wounded soldiers with her in their car to a hospital. My father sees another retired former general, Israel Ziv, who's closer to 70 than 60, but Israel put on his uniform and came like a regular soldier down south to try to help. My father tells him, Israel, I don't have a car. My wife is taking the wounded soldiers to the hospital to save them. I need to get to Nablus, where my family is barricaded. My granddaughters are there. Take me to Nablus. But we start hearing gunfire again, and this time, it's 2 kinds of guns, and we realize there is a battle. We realize that there is an exchange of fire, and I tell my wife, he's coming. My father is coming. They were fighting. He's with these soldiers. They didn't come immediately to our house. They went from house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, inside our community. I don't remember how long it took. And at 4 p.m., after 10 hours like this, we hear a large bang on the window, and we hear the voice of my father, Gilia, my oldest daughter, says, Salvahujia, grandfather is here, and that's when we all just start crying, and that's when we knew that we were safe. Isabel Gibrain and Michael B. Sikero reported for the Associated Press on the aftermath of the massacre at the Tribe of Nova Music Festival, where at least 260 people were killed. The night was a getaway. Thousands of young men and women gathered out of Astfield in southern Israel near the Gaza border to dance without a care. Old and new friends jumped up and down, reveling in the swirl of the bass heavy beats. Mayu Alper was standing toward the back of the bar with teams of environmentally conscious volunteers, picking up trash and passing out free vodka shots to partygoers who reused their cups. Just after 6 a.m., as her light blue dawn broke and the headliner DJ took the stage, air raid sirens cut through the ethereal trap music. Rockets streaked overhead. Alper, 25, jumped into her car and raced to the main road, but at the intersection she encountered crowds of stricken festival attendees, shouting at drivers to turn around. Then, a noise, firecrackers. Panicked men and women staggering down the road just in front of her fell to the ground in pools of blood. Gunshots. As the carnage unfolded before her, Alper pulled a few disoriented-looking revelers into her car from the street and accelerated in the opposite direction. One of them said he had lost his wife in the chaos.
and Alper had to stop him from breaking out of the car to find her. Another said she had just seen him as gunman shoot and kill her best friend. Another rocked in his seat, murmuring over and over, "We are going to die." Festival goers who managed to make it to the Roden parking lot while their vehicles were parked found themselves trapped in a traffic jam, with militants stalking the cars and spraying those inside with gunfire. Nowhere was safe, Alper said. The roar of explosions, hysterical screams, and automatic gunfire felt closer the further she drove. When a man just meters away shouted, "God is great," Alper and her new companion sprang out of the car and sprinted through open fields toward a mass of bushes. Alper felt a bullet whiz past her left ear. Aware the gunman would outrun her, she plunged into a tangle of shrubs, peering through thorns. She said she saw one of her passengers, the girl who had lost her friend, shriek and collapse as a gunman stood over her limp body, grinning. "I can't even explain the energy the militants had. It was so clear they didn't see us as human beings," she said. "They looked at us with pure hate." For over 6 hours, Alper and thousands of other concert attendees hid without help from the Israeli army as Hamas militants sprayed automatic gunfire and threw grenades. Her limbs were so contorted into a tangled mess in the bush that she couldn't wiggle her toes. At different points, she heard militants speak in Arabic just beside her, a yoga devotee who practices meditation. Alper said she focused on her breath, breathing and praying in every way I knew possible. "Every time I thought of anger, or fear or revenge, I breathed it out," she said. "I tried to think of what I was grateful for, the bush that hid me so well that even birds landed on it, the birds that were still singing, the sky that was so blue." A tank instructor in the Israeli army, Alper knew she was safe when she heard a different kind of explosion, the sound of an Israeli army tank round. She shouted for help and soon soldiers were lifting her out of the bush. Beside her lay the lifeless body of one of her friends. The girl from her car she had seen collapse was nowhere to be found. She believes that Hamas militants took her into Gaza. At that moment, a pickup truck full of Palestinian citizens of Israel pulled up. The men from the Bedouin city of Rahat were scouring the area to help rescue Israeli survivors. Helping Alper into their car, they drove her to the police station, where she collapsed, crying into her father's arms. "This is not just war, this is hell," Alper said. "But in the hell I still feel that somehow, we can choose to act out of love, and not just fear." Patrick Kingsley and Aaron Boxerman reported in the New York Times on the families of Israelis kidnapped near the Gaza border. Yoni Asher's nightmare began early on Saturday morning during a phone call with his wife, Doron Asher Katz. Whispering, Doron said that she, her mother, and their 2 small daughters were trapped inside her mother's safe room in a village near the Gaza border. "She told me, there are terrorists inside the house," Yoni recalled. Then came worse news. Doron's mother's life partner, Gadi Moses, had left the safe room to try to reason with the intruders. She said, "They left, and they took him with them," Yoni said. Yoni, 37, hoped that at least his spouse and children would be safe, but then the phone lines went dead. It was the last time Yoni heard from his wife. Tracking her cell phone remotely, he saw that the device was taken on Saturday to southern Gaza, suggesting that she, too, had been kidnapped. Then, he said, a video circulated on social media of abducted Israelis being driven through Gaza, bundled into the back of a pickup truck by armed gunmen. In the video, he said, a gunman attempts to spread a kind of blindfold over a woman's head. Yoni said he recognized the woman. It was Doron, his wife. His daughters Razan Aviv, 5 and 3, and his mother-in-law, Efrat Katz, 67, were squashed alongside her. He said, "I can't sleep. I'm living outside my own body," said Yoni. "I have 2 little babies, 2 little girls," he added. "These little babies should not be held or kept by terrorists." A few streets away on this same kibbutz on Saturday, Yarden Bibis, 36, and his wife, Shiri, 30, also fled to the safe room in their home. Yarden was armed with a small pistol. He texted his family, while militants fired automatic weapons outside their windows. "I love you all," Yarden wrote, and then, 30 minutes later, they were coming in. The messages stopped. Later, their family said they saw footage circulating on social media showing Shiri and their 2 brightly red-haired children, one of them just 9 months old, imprisoned by Palestinian militants. There was no sign of Yarden. Shiri's parents, Yossi Silberman, an artist who worked various jobs around the kibbutz, and his wife, Margit, a kindergarten teacher who suffers from Parkinson's disease, also remain missing and are feared to have been abducted.
I just hope that they are alive, and that they are together, and I want them home, with me, so I can hug them tightly again, said Fazila, the couple's niece, sobbing. We feel that those responsible don't know what to do, because this is a situation we've never been in before. That's the feeling in Israel, she added. It's a catastrophe.